about the history of psychiatry, in other words, mental health in Zambia, focusing on the year 1924 up until the year 1968. So basically, in the year 1924, this place was not called Zambia, but it was called Northern Rhodesia. There was a federation of 3 countries, that was Northern Rhodesia, Nyasaland, and Zimbabwe, which was then called Southern Rhodesia. So in the year 1924, Northern Rhodesia was controlled, or rather governed, by the company that was called the BSA Company, which means the British South African Company. That is the company that was running the affairs of Northern Rhodesia as a nation. So we're saying in the year 1924, the government of the so-called Zambia now took over from the British South Africa Company, meaning a government was established in Northern Rhodesia independent of the British South African Company. At that stage, the mental health well-being of the people in Northern Rhodesia was not much regarded as a problem, but the physical well-being is what was regarded. So we are saying anatomically, physiologically, there was a lot of concern as compared to the mental concern or the psychiatric well-being of the people of Northern Rhodesia. So at that time, what would happen is that the patients that would have mental problems, or anyone that would be diagnosed or rather expected to have a mental problem, would be taken to a hospital in Southern Rhodesia, which is now called Zimbabwe, a hospital called Ingusheni. Now the problem with that hospital is that the bed capacity was not adequate for the number of patients that were present. So we are saying the patients from Nyasaland and patients from Northern Rhodesia would all be taken to one particular hospital in Southern Rhodesia. So from the time a government was formed in Northern Rhodesia to take over from the BSA Company, there was no mental hospital in Nyasaland and there was no mental hospital in Northern Rhodesia. So now in 1927, with the coming of the new government in 1924, there was a law that was enacted to control, or rather to regulate, mental health concerns in Northern Rhodesia. And that law was called the Lunacy Ordinance. That was the first law of mental health, or rather the first law on mental health in the land of Northern Rhodesia. So now understand that under the first law, the human rights of the mental patients was not as much regarded as a big issue. The concern was more on the physiological and the anatomical well-being of an individual. So we are saying some regulations were then introduced with the coming of the Lunacy Ordinance, because the problem was that most patients would be taken to Southern Rhodesia, in Ingusheni Hospital, meaning even though there was a law on mental health here in the country of Northern Rhodesia, there was nothing much to regulate, because anybody expected to have a mental illness would still be taken out of Northern Rhodesia for management or treatment. So now, the only places where they would manage mental patients in Northern Rhodesia were places that were called mental annexes. These places could be found in places like in Lusaka, there was a mental annex. And then in Ndola there was one, in Mansa there was one, and in Kasama there was also one. So we're saying these mental annexes were not habitable places for the mental patients. These places were often abandoned buildings near a general hospital, something that could often be found to be dirty, a place that is not habitable for a patient or for any human being at all. So we're saying patients would be taken to mental annexes and only caretakers would be in charge of these patients, because there was no psychiatrist within the country of Northern Rhodesia to take care, or rather to manage the conditions of these patients. So the Lunacy Ordinance was introduced in the year 1927 as the first law on mental health in the land of Northern Rhodesia. In 1936, we see a situation where the government now that took over from the BSA Company in Northern Rhodesia began to train caretakers in the land of Zambia. So we're saying in 1936, the first school of mental health caretakers was introduced in the land of Northern Rhodesia. And then in 1949, patients were still being taken to Ingusheni Hospital in Southern Rhodesia, while others were taken to mental annexes within the land of Northern Rhodesia. Now, those that were at mental annexes did not have a psychiatrist to provide treatment. They did not have a trained health professional to care for their mental needs. Okay, so we're saying in 1949 there was a proposal that Zambia, as it is called now, could have its own mental hospital. Now understand, this was just a proposal. This is the same period in which we see an MP of Shuangandu district, then a man who was called Sir Stewart Go-Brown, coming up with an idea of saying this nation of Northern Rhodesia should have its own mental hospital. Okay, so now in the very year, Stewart Go-Brown as well went ahead to say the country of Northern Rhodesia should as well have a school where they can train, or rather where they could train people to take care of mentally ill patients. Okay, it is in 1949 that we see the government now beginning to debate on the second law of mental health in the land of Northern Rhodesia. And in the year 1951, we see another law being enacted in Northern Rhodesia. This law was now called the Mental Disorders Act. So we're saying in 1951, Northern Rhodesia had the second law on mental health, which was now called the Mental Disorders Act. Understand that the differences were not much from the Lunacy Ordinance to the Mental Disorders Act, because even under the Mental Disorders Act, not all the rights of the mentally ill persons were protected. So we're saying then Northern Rhodesia did not have a mental hospital yet. So they still took patients to Southern Rhodesia and took care of others from the mental annexes. So we're saying there was not really much need of introducing the second law without having psychiatrists to take care for the mentally ill needs for people in Zambia. And also, there was no need again to have another law enacted when you still do not have a mental hospital as a nation. So we're saying in 1951, the second law was enacted, which was the Mental Disorders Act. And then in 1962, we see now the establishment of Chinama Mental Hospital in Northern Rhodesia. Okay, so Chinama was established because of concerns, number one, from Stewart Go-Brown, the MP of Shuangandu district, or Member of Parliament for Shuangandu district in Northern Rhodesia. From his suggestion, this message was taken to Britain and they considered establishing a mental hospital in Northern Rhodesia, and that's how come Chinama was established. Now within Chinama, there was no local psychiatrist to work for the patients, so they had to call for trained professionals from other countries such as the United Kingdom. An instance is when they called for nuns from the Catholic Church to come and take care of the needs of these people. We are saying because Northern Rhodesia then had no trained professionals, they had to call for people who knew how to handle these services from other countries. So the brothers and the priests and the nuns from the Catholic Church were called forth from Britain to come and take care of the needs of the people at Chinama Mental Hospital. So now with the introduction, or rather the establishment of Chinama Mental Hospital, the nation went forward to call in all the patients that were taken to Engusheno Hospital to come back and be taken care of from Chinama Mental Hospital. So now with the coming of all the patients, certain problems arose. Number one, some patients could not trace their families when they returned because they had taken too much time. They stayed in Zimbabwe or Southern Rhodesia for a very long time. They would stay there for years. So when they came back with their problems, they could not trace their origin. They could not trace their own families. So we are seeing a situation where patients now become stranded. They become homeless. And then the other problem that arose is that the violent patients had no ward at Chinama Mental Hospital. So now these were taken from Engusheno Hospital into various prisons in Zambia, and that is where they would be taken care of from. So these are some of the problems that arose with the establishment of Chinama, because then the bed capacity of Chinama could not contain all the mental patients that could be diagnosed within Zambia and those that were brought from Engusheno Hospital in Southern Rhodesia. Then in 1964, with the changing of Northern Rhodesia into Zambia, and also with the coming of independence for Zambia as a nation, we see an introduction of a government that's comprised of the Zambian people, with Kenneth Kaunda as the first Republican president. So now with him coming in, a few changes were introduced as regarding the mental health issues of the Zambian people. So an instance we see here is the training of psychiatric nurses. So we are saying at Chinama Mental Hospital, the nurses were now being introduced to take care of the needs of the people. So the country began to train nurses. And then in 1968, we see now the government moving forward now at Chinama to train psychiatrists to take care of the mental needs. So now these psychiatrists would be trained to know, or rather understand, clinical medicine and also understand a portion of psychiatry so that the needs of the people could be handled. So now after 1968, we see the government creating a board to take care of policy making, okay, for the mental issues in Zambia, because around 1968, Chinama was still being used as a center for policy making and regulations on mental health. But the government now introduced a board after 1968 to take care of policy making. Going forward to 1974, we see new policies now being made to regulate mental health conduct in the nation and how patients should be handled. So now with the moving of the years, we see the introduction of the Mental Health Association of Zambia. This is now the policy that used to work hand in hand with the Ministry of Health to handle issues concerning mental health, the rights of the mentally ill patients, and also legal issues concerning psychiatry, such as patients that come in conflict with the law despite having a mental illness. Okay, so all these concerns were taken care of by the Mental Health Association of Zambia and as well the Ministry of Health. But as we move forward, we see the introduction of an organization called the Mental Health Users Network of Zambia, or the Mental Health Network Users of Zambia. With the coming of this agency, it came as a challenge to the government. Why? Because some of the concerns that were handled in 1951 by the Mental Disorders Act did not actually have a provision for promoting the human rights of the mentally ill persons. So this agency came in to tell the government to say, you need to introduce another mental health law that will promote the rights of the mentally ill persons. And that's how come we see that from 1951, from that act of Mental Disorders Act, another act in the year 2012 was introduced. So now this act came in to promote the rights of the persons that had mental issues. For instance, around 1951, a violent mental patient would be mistreated, they would be ill-treated, they would be tied often in chains and beaten around, because even in Northern Rhodesia, issues of exorcism still took place. Under certain traditions, issues such as exorcism, for instance, where a patient would be beaten thinking they do not have a mental illness, but they have been possessed by an evil spirit. And then we see other traditions saying somebody can only behave in this way if at all they are being punished for a sin that they committed. So we see the traditions of Zambia from before independence and now as we speak. There was that transformation, there was that movement from treating them in a bad way or ill-treating the mental ill patients to a better treatment as indicated in the Mental Act now, the Mentally Ill Persons Act of the year 2012. So we are saying in a summary, in the year 1924, a government was formed to take care of issues concerning Northern Rhodesia as a nation. In 1927, the first law on mental health was enacted in the land of Northern Rhodesia, which was called the Lunacy Ordinance. 1936, Northern Rhodesia began to train caretakers to take care of mental patients. 1949, we see Stewart Gobram coming forward to say Zambia needs a mental clinic, or rather a mental hospital. And then in 1951, we see the enactment of the Mental Disorders Act, which still did not provide for the rights of the mental patients. 1962, we see the establishment of Chinama Mental Hospital to do policy making and also handle people with mental illnesses. 1964, we see now the nation of Zambia introducing another training for clinical officer psychiatry. And then we see in 1968 policy making now being influenced. So we see Chinama was no longer then a center for policy making, but a body was introduced to take care of policy making. 1974, we see now new policies coming in. 1981, we see now the country focusing on issues such as training of people, and then medical legal issues for people with psychiatric problems. And then we see in 2012 finally the government now saying there's need to address the human rights as opposed to what was addressed in 1951 in the Mental Disorders Act. So as we speak at the moment, the nation of Zambia still depends on one exclusive mental hospital, which is Chinama, despite the establishment of new departments at hospitals like Kabwe and also in Dola. So we've seen the government making another step towards maintaining or regulating the mental health issues in Zambia. We can only but look forward to a better day when Zambia will have mental health issues promoted as much as other medical issues.
Right.